There is one question that has haunted science for decades. How is he still alive? Not as a metaphor, not as a joke, as a literal biological puzzle. The man drank 4 bottles of cognac a day. He consumed cocaine for breakfast, morphine, sleeping pills, LSD, Rohypnol. He took 25 Vicodin pills in a single day at one point. His immune system was so destroyed by substances that he once tested positive for HIV, only to test negative. He spent 50 years living a life that would kill an ordinary person in 50 days, and yet here he stands. Ozzy Osbourne, the Prince of Darkness, the godfather of heavy metal, survived what should have been unsurvivable. That's not a story about willpower or luck. That's a story written in your blood. That's a story written in genes that most of us will never carry. In 2010, 2 of the world's leading genomics companies asked one question: what does the DNA of a man who should be dead actually look like? They took a sample of his blood. They sequenced every single letter in his genetic code, and what they found wasn't just unexpected, it rewrote what science thought it knew about human survival, human addiction, and what your body can actually endure. By the end of this investigation, you'll understand not just how Ozzy survived. You'll see what inheritance really means, and you'll carry a piece of this story with you. If you're watching right now and you're curious about what your own DNA says about you, about your ancestry, your risk factors, the traits that live in your bloodline, hit subscribe. We go this deep every single week, and the next video like this deserves to reach you the moment it's ready. Now let's follow the trail. But to understand what scientists found when they looked at Ozzy's genome, you first have to understand what they were looking for. And that raises a stranger question than most people realize. See, for decades, geneticists assumed they knew exactly why some people become addicted and others don't. They assumed it was about willpower, about environment, about choice. But when they sat down and actually looked at Ozzy's DNA, when they read the actual code, they discovered that the story was far older and far more complicated. His genome wasn't just different, it was different in ways that shouldn't exist, ways that pointed to a survival story that reaches back further than you'd expect. That's what this is really about. Over the next 24 minutes, we're going to follow that trail. We're going to trace the genetic variants that kept Ozzy alive. When every medical prediction said he should be dead, we're going to see what his mutations reveal about addiction, about how your body processes substances, and about a piece of ancient ancestry that lives in his blood, and in many of yours. And by the time we reach the end, you're going to understand not just Ozzy's story, you're going to see yourself differently. So let's begin where the scientists began, with the mystery that started everything. The year was 2010. Ozzy Osbourne was 61 years old. He had just finished a world tour, and he was plagued by a question that wouldn't let him go. He wrote about it in a column in the Times of London. His words were simple and raw. Given the swimming pools of booze I've guzzled over the years, not to mention all of the cocaine, morphine, sleeping pills, cough syrup, LSD, Rohypnol, you name it, there's really no plausible medical reason why I should still be alive. Maybe my DNA could say why. That question reached 2 genomics companies, Cofactor Genomics, based in St. Louis, Missouri, and Genome Incorporated, headquartered in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And they decided to find out. They had recently completed the Human Genome Project reference sequence. They had the tools. They had the technology, but they had never used it on someone like Ozzy. In July 2010, they took a blood sample. That sample was sent to Cofactor Genomics, where technicians used a then state-of-the-art sequencing platform. The process took 3 weeks. It cost tens of thousands of dollars, and it produced something unprecedented in popular culture, a complete genetic blueprint of a rock star. Now, when you sequence a human genome, you're reading 3 billion letters of genetic code, but you're not reading every single letter with equal precision. Cofactor's process read Ozzy's genome at what they called 13x coverage. That means each letter was read 13 times on average, less than the industry standard of 30 times, but still reliable enough to be meaningful. When the sequencing was complete, they had produced 39 gigabases. That's 39 billion letters of raw genetic data. 70% of that data was successfully mapped onto the human reference genome. The results were then sent to Nathan Pearson and his team at Genome Incorporated, who began the real work, analyzing what those letters actually meant. What they found was staggering. Ozzy's genome contained approximately 300,000 novel genetic variants, variations that had either never been seen before or were extremely rare in the general human population. To put that in context, when scientists sequence your genome, they expect to find thousands of variants. 300,000 was extraordinary. But here's where it gets interesting. Not all of those variants mattered. Most of them were neutral. They changed the code, but didn't change the outcome. The variants that mattered were the ones in very specific genes. Genes that controlled how his body processed substances, genes that governed addiction, genes that pointed to something even deeper, a piece of ancient ancestry hiding in his blood. Let me take you through the findings one at a time. The first and most significant discovery was in a gene called ADH4. This gene codes for an enzyme called alcohol dehydrogenase, and its job is simple. When you drink alcohol, ADH4 produces a protein that breaks it down in your liver. This is how your body detoxifies alcohol. Most humans, when they drink alcohol, take many hours to process and eliminate it from their system. Your liver works at a standard pace, but Ozzy's genome revealed something unusual. He carried a rare mutation in the regulatory region of his ADH4 gene, the section that controls how much of the ADH4 protein gets produced. This wasn't a mutation that destroyed the gene, it was a mutation that turbocharged it. According to the research presented by Nathan Pearson at the TEDMED 2010 conference in San Diego, this variant enabled Ozzy's body to metabolize alcohol with remarkable efficiency. His liver didn't just process alcohol, it processed it faster than the average person. Far faster. Now, pause for a second. Think about what that means. If your liver is built to break down alcohol at double or triple the normal rate, you can drink double or triple the amount before you feel the effects. You don't get drunk as quickly. You don't get sick. Your body simply handles it differently. This provided a biological explanation for something that had baffled everyone around Ozzy for decades: his legendary tolerance. The stories were real, the capacity was real, and it was written in his genes. But here's the cruel irony embedded in that mutation. High tolerance for a drug doesn't mean the drug is safe. It means you can consume more without the immediate warning signals that would normally stop you. It means your body becomes dependent at a faster rate. The research showed that Ozzy's genomic profile made him 6 times more likely than the average person to develop alcohol dependency or alcohol cravings. 6 times. That means while most people might try alcohol and move on, Ozzy's brain and body were primed for addiction. He didn't choose that. His genes made that choice for him before he was born. But it gets more complicated. Ozzy doesn't just carry the ADH4 variant. The researchers also discovered variants in his OPRD gene, which codes for opioid receptors in the brain. These variants affected how his brain responded to opioids, morphine, heroin, and other drugs in that family. His genome also showed unusual variations in genes associated with cocaine metabolism. According to the analysis, he was 1.31 times more likely to become addicted to cocaine than the average person. And for marijuana, his variants made him 2.6 times more likely to experience hallucinations. When you look at all of these findings together, the ADH4 variant, the OPRD variants, the cocaine metabolism mutations, you see a pattern. Ozzy's genome reads like a map of addiction risk factors. Every major class of drug he used, he carried genetic variants that made addiction more likely, not less. His body wasn't immune to addiction. It was predisposed to it. The very genes that allowed him to survive substances also made him vulnerable to them. That's not survival. That's contradiction. That's a man walking a razor's edge his entire life without knowing why the blade was there. But the researchers found something else, something that connects this story to something far older than Ozzy himself. When they looked deep into his genome, they discovered that Ozzy carries segments of DNA that did not come from modern humans. They came from Neanderthals. Your genes, my genes, Ozzy's genes. All of them carry traces of an ancient species that went extinct approximately 40,000 years ago. Most people of European descent carry between 1 and 4% Neanderthal DNA, inherited through ancient interbreeding events during the last ice age. Ozzy carries his share of that inheritance. Now, on its own, this isn't shocking, it's not rare, it's actually expected. But it matters because it tells us something about what's really embedded in his genome. This isn't just about choices he made as an adult, this is about a lineage, an ancestry, a survival story that reaches back tens of thousands of years. The researchers also discovered another variant that intrigued them deeply. Ozzy carries 2 copies of an unusual variant in a gene that makes a protein called CLT-CL1. This protein is involved in how nerve cells communicate with each other, specifically in how cells take in information from outside their membranes. Ozzy has 2 copies of a version of this protein that is grossly different from what most people produce. His brain is literally wired differently at the cellular level. The neurons in his brain communicate using a variant protein that is rarely seen. Then there's the COMT gene. Ozzy carries 2 versions of what researchers call the warrior and worrier variants. The COMT gene is responsible for breaking down dopamine, epinephrine, and norepinephrine, all neurotransmitters that affect mood, focus, stress response, and executive function. The 2 variants create very different brain profiles. People with the warrior variant tend to be more resilient under stress, but may struggle with focus. People with the worrier variant tend to be more cautious, more detail-oriented, but more sensitive to stress. Having 2 different versions means Ozzy's brain had to balance both profiles. He was built for high-stress environments, for handling chaos, but also primed to feel things deeply. When you bring all of these findings together, the turbocharged alcohol gene, the heightened addiction, vulnerability, the unusual protein variants, the rewired brain chemistry, the ancient Neanderthal ancestry. You're not looking at a man who is immune to drugs. You're looking at a man whose entire biology is calibrated differently. Not better, not worse, different. His body processes substances faster. His brain is wired for high stress resilience. His neurons communicate using proteins that most people don't have. His addiction risk is elevated across multiple drug classes. He carries the inheritance of an ancient species in his blood. All of this was discovered not through speculation or guesswork, but by actually reading his genetic code. Now, when you first hear all of this, there's a natural assumption that forms. You might think, so Ozzy's DNA made him rock and roll. His genes made him wild. His genome explains everything. But that's not what the science actually says. And this is where the story takes a crucial turn. Nathan Pearson, the lead researcher at Genome who analyzed Ozzy's genome, made this clear at TEDMed. He said, "We cannot find the Ozzy Osbourne gene. What we did see is a lot of interesting smoke, but not any specific fire." Think about that. 300,000 novel variants, multiple rare mutations and addiction-related genes, unusual protein structures and neurons, ancient ancestry, and yet none of it explained his musical genius. None of it explained his charisma. None of it explained why he chose to live the way he did, or how he survived it. Genetics don't determine destiny. They don't write your story, they just load the gun. You decide whether to pull the trigger. Here's what his genome actually reveals: predisposition, risk, inheritance. His body was built to handle substances faster than most people. His brain was wired for high stress environments. His ancestry connects him to the deep past. But all those variants together don't automatically make someone an addict. They don't automatically make someone a rock star. They don't automatically make someone survive the unsurvivable. What they do is shift the odds. They change the landscape of choices. And Ozzy lived on that altered landscape his entire life, sometimes thriving, sometimes barely surviving, but always pushing against the edge of what biology said was possible. The detail in what we've covered here, the specific genes, the actual variants, the real science, that's what separates this from speculation. We go this deep every single video we make. If you want to find your own story in the science, if you want to understand what your DNA might be telling you, subscribe so the next investigation reaches you. So what does Ozzy's genome ultimately tell us? It tells us that survival isn't simple. It tells us that your body carries instructions written millions of years ago, before there was music, before there was rock and roll, before there was consciousness as we know it. Those instructions were selected for because they helped your ancestors survive. In Ozzy's case, those instructions, the fast metabolism, the stress resilience, the rewired neurons, were selected because they helped humans survive ice ages and famines and the constant pressure of a hostile world. But when you take those same instructions and drop them into modern life, where the pressure isn't survival but indulgence, where the resources aren't scarce but abundant, those same adaptations can become liabilities. The ability to process alcohol fast becomes the ability to drink yourself into oblivion. The stress resilience becomes the ability to ignore warning signals. The ancient Neanderthal DNA, inherited from ancestors who survived the last ice age, becomes irrelevant to navigating 21st century excess. The real genius of Ozzy, and this is what the genome cannot capture, is that he survived not because of his genes, but despite them. His genes loaded the odds against him, and yet he's still here. He's still making music. He's still alive. That's not genetic destiny. That's human will. That's choosing every single day to keep going even when your own biology is working against you. When Ozzy looks at his genome sequence, he sees the evidence of a contradiction. Genes that make addiction more likely, carrying a body that survived decades of addiction. Genes that wire the brain for chaos, belonging to a man who created art out of chaos. Genes that connect him to an ancient world inherited by someone living in the modern one. His genome is a map of contradictions. And maybe that's exactly what it should be. Your blood is older than your name. It is older than your country. It carries traces of ancestors who crossed oceans, who survived ice ages, who outlived empires. You carry their adaptations. You carry their risk factors. You carry their inheritance. The variants in your genome are not destiny. They are not a script. They are simply the raw material from which you build your life. Ozzy's story proves that. A man whose genes seemed designed for self-destruction built one of the most enduring careers in music history. A man whose biology predicted addiction survived not by denying his nature, but by acknowledging it and moving forward anyway. You carry the inheritance of survivors. You carry a record written in your cells. You carry a homecoming, whether you know it or not. Hit like on this video. It genuinely helps more people find their own story written in the science. Comment which finding hit the hardest for you. Was it the ADH4 variant, the brain chemistry differences, the Neanderthal ancestry? Tell me what resonated. And if you know someone else who's curious about what their DNA is telling them about their ancestry, about the inheritance they carry, send this to them. They deserve to know too. I've gone even deeper on how your blood type connects you to ancient migration patterns, how your surname contains codes your ancestors left behind, how the traits you thought were just you are actually echoes of survival stories thousands of years old. Go watch that next. It's stranger than this, and it's waiting for you. Carry your story well. It has come a very long way.